Shalom, welcome to the Jewish Task Force, JTF. My name is Chaim Ben Pesach, and we have another program with the great David Ben Moshe. This is going to be a very important program because here we're going to document something. Well, we're going to speak about something which I think very few Americans know about. Hundreds of thousands of young European whites are converting to Islam. Huge numbers are converting to Islam. Neo-Nazis are converting to Islam. Leftists are converting to Islam. All types of people converting to Islam in Europe because of the spiritual vacuum there. We're going to discuss that and the implications for the future of the world with all of that, because the Muslims are taking over. And, of course, David Ben Moshe always has very important things that he wants to bring up. But before we start, this program is dedicated to a refuah shlema, complete recovery for Mark Ben Sarah, Sharon Mitman, Shlomo Ben Sarah, Dorit Bat Sarah, Ruven Ben Shoshana, and Ruth Bat Sarah, and to Ilui Neshamot, elevating of the souls for Malka Bat Meir, Allegra Bat Shlomo, Daniel Nankin, Victor Chazdai, Pesach Zeb Ben Dov, Lunita Adler, Shifra Hoffman, Ruven Hoffman, Barry Hoffman, Harab Mir Kahana, Rab Benjamin Kahana, Tzipora Fegi Bat Liba, Yosef Ben Meir, Robert Mittman, Dennis Shore, Helen Friedman, and Charles Zolat. Christianity, which flourished in Europe for many, many years, and unfortunately was very violent and intolerant toward the Jews. They murdered huge numbers of Jews. They burned Jews alive in the Inquisitions. They murdered Jews during the Crusades, slaughtering hundreds of thousands of Jewish men, women, and children. Nevertheless, it was a very powerful force in Europe, and now it's in drastic decline. Churches are empty. Young people have left the religion. The overwhelming majority of Europeans consider themselves to be secular at this point. So we see in Europe a trend where they've moved away from the Christian religion. And we see that trend, by the way, beginning in the United States now among the young generation. Young Americans are moving away from religion and religious belief, and churches are beginning to empty in the United States as well. So we see a situation here where a vacuum is being created, because there's no such thing as a vacuum in people's lives. When you have a situation where people don't have any religious anchor, they're going to turn to something. They're going to look for something. They're going to search for some purpose or meaning in life. That's going to happen. Young people want to have a meaning. They want to see what the purpose of life is, what the meaning in life is. And older people who know that they're nearing the point where they're going to leave this world, they want to hope that they're going to leave this world, that there's something beyond the grave. They would at least hope for that. And so you see a natural situation here where, to fill that vacuum, especially in Europe, very large numbers of young European whites are turning to Islam. There's a pretty large movement of Islamic conversion going on in European countries. Even European neo-Nazis are converting to Islam. And European communists and leftists are converting to Islam. Now, the left has formed an alliance with the Muslims against Israel and against the West and Western values. So this is something that's known, even though you would think that the positions of the left and the things that the left, the ideology of the left, seems to be at odds with the ideology of Islam. But both of them share a deep-seated hatred for God, for the real God of the world, which is the God of Israel, for Judaism, for God, and also a hatred for the Christian religion, and for anything involving the West or Western values. They hate those values. They hate America. They hate Israel. And so that left-wing hatred finds a natural ally in Islam, because the Muslims, of course, also hate America and hate Israel and hate the Jews and hate Judaism and hate Christianity. This is something that, where they find a natural commonality, even though in the end, the Muslim way of life is very different from the left-wing atheistic or agnostic way of life in Europe and in Western countries. Very, very different. But people want to find some meaning in life, and so they're turning to this primitive, barbaric religion It's really, really unbelievable, but this is what's taking place in huge numbers. And it's a danger that creates a real nightmare scenario for the future of the world. And by the way, when I say that hundreds of thousands are converting, there are those who believe that, in fact, the number, it runs into the millions that are either converting or are very sympathetic to Islam. You see the huge demonstrations in London, Paris, Berlin, all these other cities, Rome, gigantic Vienna, huge demonstrations on behalf of Hamas. And a lot of the people that go to those demonstrations are leftists. Some of them are Muslims, of course, a lot of them are Muslims, and a lot of them are leftists. And the leftists are influenced by the Muslims when they go to those demonstrations, become friends with the Muslims, are influenced by the Muslims, and the Muslims do missionary work, trying to convert them, and are succeeding in many cases. Now, let's understand what all of this means. What happens with Europe's very low birth rate? Europe's birth rate is way below the numbers you need to replace population, but you do need 2.2 or 2.3 babies born in every family for just to keep the population as it is, just for the population, not to increase or not decrease, just to maintain the current population. You need 2.2 or 2.3 babies. In almost every Western European country, and even in Eastern European countries, it's way below that. It's 1.5, 1.6, 1.7, very, very low. And that's including the Muslims, the millions of Muslims there. The Muslims have a high birth rate there. So the Muslims and the third world people, you also have third world people from Africa and Asia and all these other countries that have immigrated there. And they have a high birth rate, a much higher birth rate. If the native white birth rate in Europe is really, really low. And so that, in combination with this massive conversion process, you're creating a situation here where eventually the Muslims will become an extremely powerful force. They're already a powerful force in Europe. They already influence European politics. But they're going to become a force that's in effect going to control European countries. Can you imagine Muslims controlling countries that have the knowledge to produce huge numbers of the most sophisticated nuclear weapons that could terrorize the world, that could destroy humanity? Can you imagine Muslims being in charge of these countries? Imagine Muslims in charge of Germany, France, Britain, all these other countries, which these are countries which have intelligent people and scientists and technological people who could create nuclear arsenals that could destroy the world. What will happen if that occurs? So we're faced with a very grim prospect, and the reason for that is because nobody is going out and giving the true moral message, the moral message that would fill the vacuum. The Jews are supposed to be doing that. The Jews are supposed to be a light unto the nations and a holy nation, a nation of priests. The Jews are supposed to be explaining to the world what you're supposed to do. The Gentiles, according to Judaism, are supposed to be B'nai Noach, are supposed to follow the 7 commandments of the children of Noah, which are basically commandments just to lead decent moral lives. That's the only thing that Judaism requires of the Gentiles, to lead decent, normal lives. The Jews have more commandments. Why? Because the Jews are supposed to be like the priests. In other words, when in the next world, the Gentiles are going to come to the land of Israel, and the Jews are going to be there, and they're going to want to come to the Holy Temple, and they're going to have a great spiritual experience with God when they make those pilgrimages to the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. This is in the next world, in the world to come, which is a world of eternal life. And that's going to be in this world, by the way, not in heaven. It's going to be in this world. So that's according to Judaism. And so the Gentile nations are going to have to come to make pilgrimages, those Gentiles that make it into the next world, and those Jews that make it into the next world, because there's going to be a lot of Jews and a lot of Gentiles that are not going to make it because they're evil. But those Gentiles who make it into the next world and those Jews who make it into the next world, the Jews are going to be like the priests, a nation of priests, and they're going to welcome the Gentile pilgrims to come, into Jerusalem, and the Gentile pilgrims are going to have a great spiritual experience, even a prophetic experience with God. And that will give them the energy to continue to go back to their countries and continue to run the world, because the Gentiles are going to be running the world outside of Israel in the next world. The Jews are going to be running Israel, and that's going to be the spiritual center, and the Gentiles are going to run all the nations outside of Israel. That's Judaism's vision for the world. And so the Gentiles, in order to make it into the next world, have to follow the 7 commandments of Bnei Noach. Bnei Noach means the children of Noah, which are basically commandments not to murder, not to steal, no idolatry, no sexual immorality. The 7 commandments set up courts of justice. In other words, there has to be justice. You don't just mistreat and abuse the orphan and the widow and all the other things that the Bible clearly tells us, that the prophets warn us about over and over again. Don't abuse the weak people and the orphan and the widow in your society. You have to have compassion and morality and decency, and build a nation and build a society of kindness and love. If you do that, you'll make it into the next world. You'll have eternal life. If you don't, you won't. That's the message. Now, for the Jews, there are 613 commandments, much more than the 7 commandments. By the way, the 7 commandments of the Gentiles are the minimum that they have to follow. They can follow more if they wish, but the minimum is 7. For the Jews, it's a much higher bar, because the Jews are supposed to again have this special role of being like a nation of priests that will be able to welcome the Gentile pilgrims into the land of Israel and create the right atmosphere for the next world. But that message that I just gave you now, which is the message that should be sent out to the world, is a message that is not being sent out to the world by the Jews. The Jews are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, and the Gentiles are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so it was all predicted, by the way, that this would happen, but it doesn't have to be. It was predicted that in the end days, that the world would be very evil, and then God will bring judgment, and the final redemption will come. But the final redemption will come with great punishment and all types of things that God will do to force the world to wake up and realize what's going on. But it'll bring tremendous punishment and suffering if the world continues down this road. And it was predicted that in all probability that would happen. Why do I say in all probability? Because you can't make absolute predictions about people's behavior. People have bechira chofshit in Hebrew, which means free will. All human beings have free will. And people can choose between good and evil. So people could choose to do good. And if they choose to do good, then the suffering and the punishment and the judgment wouldn't come. And you'd have wonderful things very quickly. And you'd have an end to death. Judaism is the most optimistic religion in the world. Judaism is a religion that believes we can defeat death, and that someday we're going to defeat death, that we're going to have eternal life in the next world. Where do you get a religion so optimistic? And Judaism is the most tolerant religion in the world. Judaism is a religion that says you don't have to become a Jew to have eternal life. You don't have to convert to the Jewish religion. You don't have to do that. The Gentiles don't have to do that. If the Gentiles just follow basic rules of decency and morality and live good and decent and proper lives according to what God commands, if they do that, they'll have eternal life in paradise in the next world. And the next world will be like paradise. So Judaism is the most tolerant religion, and Judaism is the most optimistic religion in the world. There are other religions in Eastern societies, for instance, India and China and other countries, where they have religions that are very pessimistic, where the world is just a terrible, dreary place, and the best you can have is nirvana. You just disappear. That's considered to be the best situation, where you just disappear and become part of the atmosphere, and you no longer really exist. You're just part of the atmosphere. That's the height. Or you're reincarnated and become a cow, or other things that are in other religions. I mean, and again, that's what people believe in, but that's not the Jewish vision, and that creates a lethargic, pessimistic view of the world. Very pessimistic view of the world. In any event, the Jews have an obligation and have a special mission, and they've got to show the world what it is to be a light unto the nations and a holy nation, nation of priests. But they're not doing that in Israel. They're not living that life, and they're not setting that example. And so the world is a world of chaos and horror. The only way we can stop that is if we have Jews that will take over Israel, and eventually that will happen. Eventually, the Jews are going to wake up. Something's going to happen to wake them up. You saw an example on October 7th of last year. You saw an example of the type of things, unfortunately, that may happen to wake them up. But something's going to happen to wake them up. Things are going to happen, that events will happen that will force them into changing, that will force them to understand that leaders like Rabbi Meir Kahane, Zecher Tzaddik V'Kadosh Livracha Hashem Yikom Damo, that leaders like Rabbi Kahane were right, and that the Jews that told the truth, the politically incorrect truth, they were the right ones. They were the ones who should be followed. Their example should be followed. Or like the Hilltop Youth, by devoting their lives to making this a better world, by being willing to sacrifice everything and put their lives on the line and live in simple, very simple conditions, so that the Arab Muslim Nazis don't take over Judea and Samaria, so that the Jews do have the land of Israel, have the land that they need in order to set this example, in order to bring final redemption. The Hilltop Youth are an example of what the Jews would be like if they decided to finally do what they've been called to do, because Jews have a higher calling, and so do the Gentiles. And as we said many times on this program, an example of how this would spread. What if you had Gentiles who saw the example of the Hilltop Youth and said, you know something? We're going to do this on America's borders. We're going to make sure that people don't take over the United States of America, because the United States of America has a moral message that's on a much higher level than the third world countries that want to take over America. And we're going to do this on America's borders. We're going to be inspired by the Hilltop Youth. That's something that might happen. It's something in the future. It might not happen, may never happen. But if it did happen, that would be an example of the nations of the world being inspired by the Jews to do what's right, seeing the example set by the Jews to do what's right. In the meantime, perhaps after this discussion, you understand why the Bible says that the Jews, that God blesses all nations through the Jews. And I mean, we see that the greatest, the best-selling book in the world is the Bible. That's the best-selling book in the world. But in certain European countries now, it's been replaced by the Quran. And in the end, we're going to see a struggle between the Bible and the Quran. That's really what the war between Israel and the Muslim world is all about. To see who is right. 1.5 billion Muslims who believe in the Quran and believe in Muhammad, believe in Islam, are they right? Or are the Jews that believe in the Bible, that have returned to their land after 2,000 years of exile, after being hated and persecuted and tortured far more than any other people in history, in ways that are unimaginably horrifying, and returning 2,000 years later, after the prophets told us thousands of years ago that all of this was going to happen, and redeeming the land, and winning tremendous victories in 6-day wars, outnumbered 100-1. Is that what is true and right? Or is the message of Islam that all the world has to follow Muhammad? Is that what is true and right? Is the example set by the Muslim world the example the world wants to follow? There are 57 Muslim countries in the world.
And you left out that those that don't follow Islam are to be killed.
Right. That's also true. Either forcibly converted or killed, one or the other. They have a choice. They could be forcibly converted or killed. So that's nice. You get a nice choice. There are 57 Muslim countries in the world. Look at the example they set. All 57 are brutal, barbaric, corrupt, sadistic dictatorships. Monstrous dictatorships that torture and rob and rape their own people. 57 countries, not one is a decent country. Not one. Even if they have massive amounts of oil wealth, they still live like I mean, like filthy slobs. It doesn't matter. It doesn't. It doesn't matter how much. It doesn't matter how much money they have.
Like camel jockeys.
Yeah, I mean, just horrific. You know, they still torture their women, brutalize their children, enslave their people, exploit their people, and these are countries with trillions of dollars in oil wealth. Where per capita they're the wealthiest nations in the world because of the oil. And still, their countries are a nightmare. And the countries without the oil, wow, they don't even function. They practically don't even function. Countries like Syria and Libya and these other countries, you know, just tribal warfare all the time and massacring millions of their own people. Horrific, just horrific. So that's the vision of Islam versus the Jewish vision from the Bible. And people will have to make a choice eventually. Now, the left says there's a third vision, which is atheism and secularism and rejecting all religion. That is a third option, and we see what a nightmare. I think you saw what a nightmare that is when the communists take over a country. They've murdered so many people. The Russians and the Chinese murdered so many of their own people and tortured and enslaved their people. The barbarism, I don't think that it's any less horrifying than the nightmare of Islamic dictatorships. So people eventually are going to make a choice, and eventually they're going to see the truth. The question is, what will it be too late? Will it be too late for you, those of you that are watching? Will it be too late for your friends and neighbors and your fellow citizens? Who will it be too late for, and who will it not be too late for? That's the question. And that's the question we have to answer. In the meantime, there is a force for good in this world that is doing good against all odds, and that's the Hilltop Youth. And you can support that force for good. That's the ultimate example of a force for good in the world that's doing the right thing, that's trying to save Israel from the insanity and the treason of its own leaders. There are two ways you can support the heroic Hilltop Youth. One is you can go to our Hebrew main page, hayamin.org, and hayamin.org is in Hebrew. Most of the pages in Hebrew, almost all the pages in Hebrew, but there is a donate button in English on top, a big donate button. You click on the donate button, and in several minutes, very easily and conveniently, you can donate online. And it's something you definitely should do. The Hilltop Youth are helping you more than you're helping them. You're helping yourself more than you're helping the Hilltop Youth when you donate. You really are. Someday you'll see. You'll see if I'm right someday. You'll never regret doing good things. Doing bad things, you'll always regret in the end. Doing the good things and fighting for good and standing up for good, you'll never regret that. In the end, you'll always see it was worth it. If not in this world, then in the next, but you'll always see that it was worth it. If you prefer donating, that's one way to go to hayamin.org. And if you prefer not to do it online, if you prefer to do it through the regular mail, you can send checks and money orders made out to JTF, and you send it to our P.O. Box, JTF, P.O. Box 650327, Fresh Meadows, New York, 11365. I don't know how people cannot see this as a tremendous threat to all of us, that so many young white Europeans are converting to Islam now, and that Islam is taking over in these countries, in universities, in all types of settings, and has formed this alliance with the left, and gradually, if there's an alliance between Islam and the left, eventually Islam is gonna consume that left and take in that left. I don't know how people cannot understand what a threat this is, and I think it's obvious that what we're offering is the only solution to that threat, the only antidote to that threat. The antidote to bad is good. Sur mera ve'aseh tov. That means go away from evil and do good. That's what the Bible commands us. And that's what we should do as Jews and as righteous Gentiles. And so the message of this program is not only something that should be interesting to you, it's something that can save your eternity, because if we do good and we do what God commands us to do, that is something that will give us eternity, that will give us the gift of eternity. David?
Well, I'm just going to add to what you said, that the left combining with Islam and leftists wanting to become Muslims, they become Muslims because this makes all their crimes, you'll pardon the expression, kosher, as Muhammad did. The guy was a murderer, a rapist, a pedophile, and he created a religion to make all of that kosher. Here is Robin Evans. You can see she's a young Black woman. She started a group called Chicks with Triggers. And the next picture, you could see her gun with pink details. But I want you to notice the smile on her face. She's a conservative. Why is it that conservatives always have smiles on their face? They find things funny, while the left is miserable all the time. The only thing they find funny is when they destroy, and that's all they do. Everything they touch, they destroy. So why is this? That this woman, she's a Black woman, why is she smiling like conservatives do? Conservatives find jokes funny. The left doesn't. They're miserable, miserable people. Look at what happened with Planet Fitness. That is a gym that is all over the country. Some are private franchises. They still have to take their orders from corporate heads. And some are directly owned. But there's hundreds of them all over the country. And as we found out, in Alaska too. Now, it's a perfect gym for women. It's a perfect gym for older people. It's a good gym. It's an okay gym for those who want to lift weights. It's not a good gym if you're one of those giant bodybuilders who take steroids. They don't want you there, and they will kick you out if you're too big, too bulky. I lift weights, but I don't take anything funny at all. As Chaim knows, I don't even eat healthy. I just lift weights and let the chips fall where they may. So I wear this black t-shirt that you see me in every week. Someday I may even wash it. But I wear it to the gym. I'm all covered up with just short sleeve shirts. Other guys come in and the shirt is cut away to display the muscles. My gym is pretty tolerant, my Planet Fitness, because most of the people there are 70, 80, 85 years old, quite a few in the 60s. It's for older people. And we did have a problem where a man went into the woman's locker about 6 months ago, but I think all he saw was women in their 70s and their 80s, so he stopped that. And there were complaints, and the management told him there's nothing we could do. This is coming from corporate. Well, now in Alaska, this woman took a picture of a man who's not even transitioning. He was a man. He was shaving his face. I think he also shaved his legs, but he shaved his face. Short hair, like a man's haircut. I guess he was about 5'7", 5'8". And there was a 12-year-old girl there who felt very uncomfortable. The woman who complained to the front desk, she took a picture of him, and they threw away her membership because of that picture, because she's not allowed to take pictures in the locker room. But she wasn't doing it for satisfaction or to see what she could see later on. She did it to show the front desk what was going on there, and they threw her out. So she's been interviewed on telephone calls from various news agencies and mainstream media, especially Fox, not so much on the left-wing media. And Planet Fitness stock, I'm not going to say tanked, they lost about $400 million, and they're losing membership left and right. Now, I have a wife to worry about, and she likes it there, but I'm trying to convince her to go somewhere else. Maybe there's a new one here, Get Fit, and they don't say much on their website, but they do show a lot of pictures. and it looks pretty good. I'm sure I would love it there. I got to see if Ashadina would. But once again, the left isn't happy unless they're destroying. So they destroyed Planet Fitness. It was a great gym for women. And women don't want men in a locker. I could see young men who wouldn't mind women in the men's locker. I could see that. But women don't want that. Women have other things that they don't want to display. Maybe a mastectomy or monthly problems. They don't want a man seeing that. So what Planet Fitness is doing is they're giving the rights to one person and ignoring the rights of all the women in that gym. Or you could take it, since that's a corporate rule, it's all the women in all the gyms. You're talking thousands upon thousands of women who go to Planet Fitness. And they're ignoring it. See, in this country now, country is ruled by the minority. The majority has no say. So with the stock going down, the management of Planet Fitness tried to double down. They even came out and said, well, he wasn't a member of the gym. And notice they said he wasn't a member of the gym, which he clearly was. Then when that got laughed at, they said, well, it never happened. Well, of course, this woman has the photo of it happening, but right now, I didn't look today, but as of yesterday, management is saying it never happened. Also, the staff in all the gyms are not allowed to discuss it. I've had a lot of people in my gym quit, and I'd like to be one of them. Hopefully, Ashadina, I know she has a lot of friends there that she works out with, and she hates working out, and she wouldn't work out without them. So I don't know. I may be stuck there, but I would love to go because of this. There was I told you I promised I'd tell you about Belgium. As you know, Belgium was an ally during the war, and they were conquered by Germany. And that's where the bulk of the Battle of the Bulge was fought. Some in France, but mostly in Bastogne. And today, Belgium has this staircase. You've seen staircases like this in San Francisco. If you've ever watched Laurel and Hardy in the Music Box, where they have to carry this piano up what looks like to be about 125 steps with a landing about every 15 steps. Well, that's what this staircase looks like, these outdoor steps. And what Belgium did, without any landings, what Belgium did was they painted the whole staircase. It's a straight up staircase, no landings, about 125 steps, maybe a few more. They painted it with the Palestinian flag. So you have one long Palestinian flag going up those steps. That's Belgium today. Don't they realize that what's going on in Israel is civilization against a bunch of barbarians? Don't they realize that for every Muslim Israel eliminates, that's one less that's going to come after everybody else when that's all over?
By the way, the Flems were Nazis during World War II. The Flems, which is a huge part of the Belgian population, were Nazis. There was a division. There were a part of the Belgian population that did support the Allies, but the Flems were Nazis. Just for the record. So I'm not surprised that happened.
Norwegians too. They thought they were doing the right thing, fighting Bolsheviks on the Eastern Front. So yeah, I could see that. I don't think they had enough to make up a full division, but there was the Viking division. It was like not Germans, not Italians, not Romanians or Hungarians or Croatians. It was like the Norwegians and everybody else.
Norwegian police and the Dutch Norwegian police, Dutch police, the police in many of these countries, they supported the Nazis. They joined with the Nazis.
Quisling. If you ever heard the name Quisling,
right?
He welcomed the Nazis into Norway.
Right.
I became an NRA member about 3 months ago, and I get magazines, and there's a case it was already won by the NRA against Bruin, the right to carry a gun in New York. But Democrats never listen to the Supreme Court. They always find a way around it. So they took another case to federal judge John Kane. I'm glad he's not Jewish. He's an 86-year-old holdover from the Jimmy Carter years. He was appointed by Jimmy Carter. 86 years old. Shouldn't he have retired at least 20 years ago? But you have to pry these people out because they make fortunes. So Judge Kane ruled that, yes, you have the right to keep and bear arms, but you don't have the right to buy guns. That's not written anywhere. How do they expect you to keep and bear arms if you can't purchase guns? Are you supposed to steal them? Are you supposed to buy them on the black market?
Twilight Zone. Twilight Zone.
Yeah, the left is nuts. And that's the shortest, simplest definition for the left. They are crazy. Now, you know this is going to be overturned in a higher court. I think these lower courts are just a waste of time and a waste of money. Why not just take it to the highest court in the land right away and get the final decision? Why do you need all these intermediate steps? The Constitution provides for the Supreme Court. It doesn't provide for these lower courts.
I hope you're right. I hope you're right about the higher courts. This country's going crazy. I don't know. And by the way, if we lose our right to bear arms, that's the end of America. That's it. It's over if that happens.
Just look at what the government does to you when you're armed to the teeth. Imagine what they're going to do to you if you don't have arms. In New York City, I don't know if Chaim, do you still take the subways into Manhattan from time to time?
Unfortunately.
Well, of course, as most people know now, the National Guard is down there, along with state policemen and the transit police. So you're protected there. I don't know if you're protected in every single subway car.
I don't know how much they have to stop people, right? If they think that there's someone suspicious. So I was in a subway station. I was the only white guy, by the way, there. The only white guy. An elderly, I'm 67 years old, an elderly white guy. And I'm the one they picked to do the random search on. And I'm not going to say what the ethnicity was of the people doing the search. People can guess. But they picked me to do the random search. You have all these other gangbangers and other people going through the subway. They're all going through the subway, and none of them was searched. I was the one they picked us up. So what can I tell you? I mean, it's just the thing is just pathetic. If we had the right to bear arms in New York City, people would be a lot safer. We don't have the right. By the way, they've taken away our right to bear arms in New York City effectively has been taken away for years now. You can't. Very, very hard to get to get a permit, a gun permit in New York City. Very hard. You got to go through all types of loops and you have to have connections, and it's very, very difficult. And if that happens on a national level, which is what they want to do, if that happens on a national level, again, I don't see how America gets out from under that if that happens. Protecting the right to bear arms has got to be one of the most important battles that have to be fought here.
Well, one of the stations, I don't know if you go to it, the Fulton Street station. It was redone, made to look really nice, like all the stations do in China or in Russia. I guess they wanted this to be the show station. 8 different train lines come into this station. So they're not on the same tracks because, as I explained last week, the IRT is a narrow gauge train. The BMT, Brooklyn Manhattan Transit, IND, that's the independent line. IRT was Interborough Rapid Transit, I believe. Well, the BMT and the IND are on normal gauge tracks, and if you notice it, you can see the cars are much wider. So they come in on different tracks. But before you go down deep into the subway, they built a $1.5 billion mall there on 2 levels. And hoping to get the subway traffic because everybody coming down to the train has to pass these stores.
Complete waste of money.
It turned out to be a complete waste of money because of crime. Every store is shut down. There's a grill where you can buy a hot dog. And I think one other thing, it's not really a store, it's like a little stand in the middle. And Westfield is the name of the owner of the mall. And they own malls and other train stations too. And they want to break their lease. It was supposed to be a 20-year lease. They thought they'd make a fortune. And instead, they're losing money hand over fist because there's no stores there paying rent anymore. So they want to get out. And the city is suing them to stay. But they want to get out no matter what because they're losing money. These are not charitable organizations. They're there to make a profit. They have executives they have to report to. The executives have shareholders they have to report to. And they have a stock price they have to keep up. So they can't afford to stay. And New York City did this to themselves by not only allowing crime, it seems like they're encouraging crime. There was another squatter in Queens. I don't think it was my old neighborhood, not Flushing. A woman came home to her house, found 2 squatters in there, and they shot and killed her. And Flushing, where I used to live, the one we told you about last week, vigilantes came, and they told these squatters to get out or we'll be back. I think they were arrested, but other vigilantes came, and 2 of the 3 squatters got out. I don't know what they were threatened with. Maybe they were guys with a lot of vowels on their last name who came with tire irons. But you don't want to wake up in the middle of the night and see 2 guys with ski masks holding tire irons about to bash your brains in. So that house may be clean now. And I feel so sorry. There's an Italian woman. She inherited from her parents when they died. And instead, squatters came in and started drilling holes in the walls. The neighbors saw that. And of course, when the police questioned the neighbors of what happened, they didn't see anything. Even if they did see something, they didn't see anything.
I think I said on one of the prior shows that, you know, I had an apartment for myself and my late mother in Miami Beach in Florida. And did I mention this on the program? I don't know if I've discussed it.
You told me. I don't know if you told. I don't think you told it on the show.
But I'm sorry. I know you're hearing that, right? Okay. What was I going to say? Yes, I had an apartment in Miami Beach, and a squatter came in. But Miami Beach and Florida are not New York. You have Governor Ron DeSantis in charge there. He was arrested immediately and thrown in jail. And months later, I'm still getting notices that he has a court case and this date and a trial date, and he's still in jail. He's still locked up. So that's the difference between when you have someone like Governor DeSantis in charge in Florida, who's an excellent governor, as opposed to the subhuman scum that run New York.
And I want to talk about Trump's bail and what happened this week. His bail with penalties would have been about $455 million. They cut it to $175 million. The appellate court just reached in, or maybe Trump had lawyers there pleading a case, and they cut the bail to $175 million. I want to point out that we all know the Second Amendment, which gives you the right to bear arms because a militia is needed, and the people are that militia. Japan said they could never invade the United States because there's a gun behind every blade of grass. Stalin said Russia could never invade the United States because every house has a few guns. Not true, but he's pretty close to the truth. Well, we are the militia. We are what's allowed. And we all know the First Amendment, the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, the freedom of the press, especially if the press is a propaganda arm for the left. But most people don't. Oh, the Fourth Amendment, they can't come into your house, seize it, and do searches. Nobody knows what's in the other 7 amendments. But the Eighth Amendment says no cruel and unusual punishment, no excessive fines, no excessive bail. So what they did to Trump, even by cutting it in half, that is excessive, and I'm going to prove it to you. Do you all remember Bernie Madoff, who made off? He was supposed to be like an investment house. He made off with a lot of rich people's money. They thought they were investing and getting 15% interest. And instead, he was taking the money, living high on the hog. And in many cases, their money was gone. He almost put the ACLU out of business. He fixed Barbara Streisand, so she had to come back out of retirement and sing again. And of course, at her age, you can't hit the high notes. So she has to take it down a few keys. So he was arrested, and he could have been a flight risk. He was rich, some of it legal, some of it not so legal. He could have escaped to, I don't know, wherever there's no extradition law. They gave him 10 million bail. Trump, on the reduced bail, 175 million, and Trump has businesses all over this country. He was not a flight risk.
That's not bail for Trump. Trump is civil, so it should be much lower.
But also,
Madoff was the most serious criminal case. Even in criminal cases, they don't do what they did to Trump.
No, it's obviously a left-wing witch hunt, because I'm sure if Trump had retired in disgust, none of these cases brought against him. This is strictly the Democrats trying to stop him from running. Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, said the other investors have nothing to worry about. This is strictly against Trump. She came out and said it. And yet the media doesn't pick up. Well, the media picks up, but they don't want to pick up on it, so they don't report it. Can you imagine if it was the other way around and a Republican said that about a Democrat? It would be front page news for 3-4 days, and then move to page 2 for a few days, and then page 3 for a few days. We'd never hear the end of it. They'd be demanding that governor's resignation. But nothing happens to Kathy Hochul because she's doing such a fine job as governor of New York. Well, New York is dying. People want to leave. Businesses are leaving. A lot of people are working from home, proving you don't have to go into an office. I remember a few years ago, while I was still back in Queens, a woman who worked for West Point Stevens, the towel manufacturer, linens and stuff like that. They couldn't afford Manhattan anymore, and they looked all around. They settled on New Jersey, which was foolish. They found in North Carolina, their rent for the same amount of space would have cost them 1/3 as much. So what keeps these companies in Manhattan, where there's high crime, constant construction? They don't even leave you an alternate road. If this road is, they're digging this road up to replace some pipes, or just the crew that goes around digging holes for no reason, and then another crew comes a week later and fills it in. They're working on the next street too, because there's no alternate route. I remember one year, Ashadina was going to sing in Staten Island. Of course, we lived in Queens. It took us 3.5 hours to get there because every major artery was under construction, and we crawled by inches and inches and inches. Finally, when we got to Staten Island, I didn't have a cell phone in those days. I ran into a pizza parlor and asked, is there any phone I can use? I told them what the problem was. But there was no alternate route. Everything is under construction. Do you ever notice, if you live in New York, when they're working on the Whitestone Bridge, they're also working on the Throgs Neck Bridge. No alternate route.
By the way, if you want to pay your property taxes and mail in a check for your property taxes, for New York City, you have to mail it to New Jersey. New York City rents offices in New Jersey. Even New York City, the government of New York City does not rent in their own city. All of their offices, all the offices for New York City, all their major offices are in New Jersey, across the river in another state. Because New York is so bad and so disgusting that even the city government doesn't want to rent in their own city. Unbelievable.
Well, I have one more unknown story to tell. I want to end on a higher note instead of all gloom and doom, which is really what this country is. Some places a lot worse. During World War II, Mussolini and his fascists invaded North Africa, Ethiopia. In those days, it was called Abyssinia. And when the British came in, 30,000 British troops routed 150,000 Italian troops. The fascists want to fight, but the rest of the Italian soldiers didn't want to fight. Plus, their weapons were not up to date. Their tanks were a scandal. Their Air Force was a scandal. They weren't ready to go to war. So Mussolini, after the humiliation in North Africa, that's when Rommel came in and saved the campaign there. Mussolini looked around and saw Greece, thinking Greece was a small, weak country. But the Greeks are fierce fighters, and they didn't have modern weapons either. So the Greeks shellacked Mussolini and his fascists too, and Germany had to come in. Meanwhile, Britain came in to protect Greece. Germany came in, and they chased Britain out. And Germany didn't, like, this guarded their southern flank for attacking Russia. Germany couldn't afford the men to post for all of Greece. So they took one third of Greece. They gave Bulgaria 1/3 of Greece to govern, and Italy 1/3 of Greece to cover. Well, Germany, of course, took their Jews and sent them to the camps. The Greeks wanted to protect the Jews. The Italians couldn't care less. They refused to give up their Jews. And the same thing with the Bulgarians. The Bulgarians were finally forced to give up some Jews, but they didn't want to give up their Jews either. The Italians just out and out refused.
I don't know.
No, Mussolini stopped. They kept the Jews in camps.
20% of Italian Jews in Italy were sent to the death camps and murdered. The reason it was only 20% is because Italy surrendered in 1943.
But even Mussolini, he said, I have nothing against Jews, and he refused.
They passed the Nuremberg anti-Jewish laws in Mussolini's Italy too. The same Nazi laws.
I know.
And by the way, the Greeks, I'm sorry to say, and I have Greek friends, but I'm sorry to say, during the Holocaust, they did nothing to save any of the Jews. Not only that, the Jews in Salonika, I know because I had family in Greece. The Jews in Salonika were sent to the death camps. 90% of Greek Jewry were slaughtered. They did nothing to. The Bulgarians did tell the Germans, we don't want you to take our Jews. They did. The Bulgarians did. But the Greeks and the Italians did not.
Well, if you were Greek under the German section, of course you were going to turn your Jews over.
90% of Greek Jewry were sent to the death camps and murdered. 90% of Greek Jewry.
Well, I know 500 who weren't. And these were well-educated Jews. Many of them were nurses. And they were invited by Greece, who were fierce partisan fighters, to go into the hills and fight against the Germans. Well, a lot of these Jews were women, and they were nurses. So they went and took care of all the wounded partisans. And after Germany took over all of Greece, and started deporting all the Jews. And they started going into the hills looking for the partisans. The women nurses carried not just Jews, but also anyone who was wounded. In fact, not Jews, the Jews, these are Greeks that were wounded. They put them on their shoulders and carried them up the mountain so the Germans couldn't reach them. These were Jewish nurses who carried full-grown men up a hill, up a mountain, on their backs. And Greece really appreciated that act. And when the war was over, they all got some kind of Greek award.
But by the way, not only were 90% of Greek Jews murdered because the Greeks did nothing to protect them or didn't lift a finger. Not only that, after the war, the Greeks stole all the property of the Jews. I mean, you got to compensate or restore their property. This was Jewish property. The Jews had businesses and had property in Salonika. Not a penny The Greeks took everything, the local Greeks took everything from the Jews. I mean, it's just a matter of history. I'm sorry, but it's true. The Greeks did. The Greeks stole every last inch of Jewish property in Greece. That's a matter of history.
Well, don't forget the Greeks were mostly poor peasants. So anything they can get their hands on.
Well, you mean that's an excuse to steal? Not all Greeks were poor peasants, and there is no excuse for doing that to the Jews. No excuse. The Jews were murdered. And if they had one or two survivors in the family, you don't give them back their property, or you don't compensate them for their property that you've taken over and stolen.
Like Sergeant Schultz, I know nothing.
This is this was the worst thing you could do. So their history in the Holocaust is not a good history. I'm sorry. It was not a good history. And they should be supporting Israel and the Jews now because of the Turkish Muslims, because their enemies are the Muslims. So they should be supporting the Jews, but most Greek governments have also been anti-Israel, unfortunately. I hope that might change to a certain degree, because there are now Greece and Israel now do certain military maneuvers together, and there are certain things that are happening. But for many years,
Israeli Jews are not like American Jews.
But the history, very strong history of Greek anti-Semitism and what the Greeks did during the Holocaust was nothing to be praised, to say the least. Terrible behavior very cruel behavior toward their Jewish population which was very loyal to Greece and very beneficial to the Greek economy before the war. The Greeks, a lot of their trade and a lot of the Jews are very good business people and very good merchants. And they in Salonika, they brought a lot of wealth to that part of Greece. And the only thing they got was their property. They were murdered. Nobody said a thing about it. And the Greeks immediately came in and stole all of their property and never gave it back, and never gave the Jews a cent on all the property that was stolen. That's not a good history. I'm sorry. But anyway, your story about the Jewish nurses, that certainly is an inspiring story. That I will agree with. In your heart, you know we're right. And in your guts, you know they're nuts. For JTF until next week, this is Chaim ben Pesach, and for David ben Moshe, Shalom.